Anti-Oedipus, Silver,
Wishes after tell, hey, Penny Pings. I can't go like yellow. You know, agent your bites the whistle. Works, Ralph.
Here I go, Anti-Oedipus.
Yes, it's a William Bristol one these days. So it's still a Tom. After.
Here I go, Anti-Oedipus.
Oh, ho.
It functions everywhere, sometimes without stopping, sometimes discontinuously. It breathes, it heats, it eats, it shits, it fucks. One mistake ever said the it everywhere. It is machines, not at all metaphorically. Machines of machines with their couplings, their connections. An organ machine is connected with a source machine, one emits a flux which the other cuts. The breast is a machine that produces milk, and the mouth a machine coupled to that one. The mouth of the anorexic hesitates between an eating machine, an anal machine, a talking machine, a breathing machine, deeper machine, asthma, attack. This is why we are all tinkerers, each with their own little machines. An organ machine for an energy machine. There are always flux and cuts. Judge Schreber 5 has divine rays in his ass. Solar anus. And rest assured it works. Judge Schreber feels something, produced of something, and theorized about it. Something is being deduced effects of machines, not metaphors. Stroll of the schizophrenic. It's a better model than the neurotic lying on the couch. A bit of fresh air relationship with the outside. Take the stroll of Lenz into the outdoors. It is different from moments when Lenz finds himself with his good pastor, who forces him to situate himself socially in relation to God, in relation to Father, in relation to Mother. On the contrary, he is in the mountains under the snow with other gods or without God at all, without family, without father or mother, with nature. What does my father want? Can he give me better? Impossible! Leave me alone. Everything is a machine. And three celestial machines, the stars are rainbows, alpine machines, each coupled with those of his body, noise machine. Uninterrupted, idle instrumental. It must feeling of endless bliss to be in contact with the profound, life profound to every form. To have a soul for the rocks, metals, water, and plants, to welcome into oneself, as in a dream, every element of nature, like flowers that breathe with the waxing and waning of the moon. Både det lands att ge sig where, både där I multidagen ned, in the replies. Krongas can be a chlorophyllin machine or a photosynthesis machine, or at least slip his body as a part into such machines. Lenz put himself before the distinction of man nature, before all the identifications that this distinction conditions. He could not experience nature as nature, but as a process of production. There is no more man nor nature only process that produces the one within the other and couples the machines together. Producing machine, desiring machine everywhere, schizophrenic machines, all generic life. Me and not me, exterior and interior don't mean anything anymore. That was me, Anti-Oedipus. That was me, Anti-Oedipus. The desiring machines. Machines.
The sun was shining on the sea, or shining with all his
No
light.
crackling or static at my Discord end.
Well, I'm glad. And we are live on the YouTubes. And hello, everyone. I hope you're well. Hopefully my audio is coming through it decently. LJ's giving me checks on it fairly consistently. I'm always fascinated because, like, last week we had 50-some people for Anti-Oedipus, which I literally expect never to happen again, ever. But then we have, like, today where, like, almost no one is here, and then it'll pick up. It's always fascinating, the ebbs and flows of Anti-Oedipus readings. The ebbs and flows of Anti-Oedipus readings. Last week we did 2 paragraphs, which we should be very impressed with. Because this week we're going to be doing 1. And there's almost no chance of us moving beyond the 1. Almost no chance. I think we should just get fucking to it then. Think if there's anything interesting to talk about. No, I think we're just going to jump straight to reading and talking. So, as I've said, we are getting much closer to the end of the book. We've been discussing specifically the edges of capitalism and the sort of way that the fourth and final sort of principle of schizoanalysis comes to play, where they're talking about how people are both invested and not, how these things are working together, how these things are fucked up. But at the periphery, within capitalism, we have these weird places, art and science, where consistently things are being invented. New stuff is being made. The schiz as a process is functioning and sort of going wild. The nature of how art works mirrors how science works. There is within capital this great social axiomatic that captures the flux of science, of philosophy, of art, of whatever it is, that retains only what the market needs, with technical innovations in science, creative innovations in art. It's not about reacting to science and the deviance from the norm that science or art does, but it's actively anticipating it, almost preventing this sort of interplay, imposing goals on science, on the scientists, on art, that creates, as they say, an agency perfectly subjugated to the formation of sovereignty. So the example they use is how we had quantum indeterminism became this scientific principle that was incredibly powerful, but it didn't really fit with things we really want. So it kind of had to reconcile with a determinist sort of physicalist position, which we're finally moving away from again, thank God. But this is the eternal battle that's happening not just within science, but art and all of this. This is how the poles of things operate. And again, think of it as magnetic north and south poles, a opposition of poles in a magnetic field, that it's not at any point you are in the positive field or the negative field. It's one field is having more influence on any single position, and depending on where you are on that. And the flux of magnets aren't static. It's not like it's like, cool, that's it. It's constantly pulling and pushing. There's constant movement. There's constant change. And that thing is what they keep sort of pulling us back to. Ultimately, what they're leaning at is that this is not a epistemological or sociological phenomena, but instead that this is actually a libidinal conflict within desire, within the nature of desire itself. Unconscious investments are split between this paranoid systemization or capture apparatus and the schiz, the experimentation, the lines of escape, lines of flight on the other hand. And these two poles we are caught between, and the flux within them is pushing and pulling. Science and art under capital is a site where fundamental splits in this desire investment plays out. Because the psychic drama of it is basically seen in artists, in scientists, in those at the periphery of these sort of conflicts. And this is what they're driving at as we get going. And this next paragraph is going to be carrying that through because, again, the entire point, effectively, of where we're at. One sec. The entire point of where we're at is to ultimately get us into a position where we're able to have a better conversation about the way libidinal economies function, the way we function within them, and the way that they sort of drive us forward. Does that make sense to everyone here? Generally speaking, not yes, maybe, so, sort of. Sorry, the landlord sends gardeners, and apparently knows I stream. Because it's fucking apparently just the new time. It's great. But that's the basics. Them's the basics. Let me see, where was I? 371. Oh, I'm way off. Boop, 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 boop. I can't even hear myself think now. It'll be a moment while this passes. It's okay. I need to find our spot. Here's where we were yesterday. This is where we are now. There we go. Yay, they're moving on. All right. If there aren't any major comments or questions, I'm just going to straight up head on. As always, if you want to support this, if you get something out of this, please drop a super chat. Always fun, but head over to patreon.com/DGQC. Great times. Drop a cup of coffee a month. Is he just like standing at my fucking window? I mean, in Washington State, in fall, the leaves come down basically in 3 weeks, and they begin rotting. And so it's you need to get them out. And I'm too old to do it. And you know what? The landlord pays people. So it's not my house. That's the way it works. All right. Good. They're on. They moved on. So let's get to this paragraph and let's make our way through and see if we can get through maybe 2, but at least 1 paragraph today. I should have the text shared. I do. Off we go. There is not one of these aspects, not the least operation, the least industrial or financial mechanism, that does not reveal the insanity of the capitalist machine and the pathological character of its rationality. Not at all a false rationality, but a true rationality of this pathological state, this insanity. Quote, "The machine works too, believe me." The capitalist machine does not run the risk of becoming mad. It is mad from one end to the other. and from the beginning. This is the source of its rationality. Marx's black humor, the source of capital, is his fascination with such a machine, how it came to be assembled, on what foundation of decoding and deterritorialization, how it works, always more decoded, always more deterritorialized, how its operation grows more relentless with the development of the axiomatic, the combination of the flux, how it produces the terrible single class of gray gentlemen who keep up the machine, how it does not run the risk of dying all alone, but rather of making us die by provoking to the very end investments of desire that do not even go by way of deceptive and subjective ideology, and that lead us to cry out at the very end, "Long live capital in all its reality, in all its objective dissimulation." Except in ideology, there has never been a humane, liberal, paternal capitalism. Capitalism is defined by a cruelty having no parallel in the primitive system of cruelty, by a terror having no parallel in the despotic regime of terror. Wage increases and improvements in the standard of living are realities, but realities that derive from a given supplementary axiom that capitalism is always capable of adding to its axiomatic in terms of an enlargement of its limits. Let's create the New Deal. Let's cultivate and recognize strong unions. Let's promote participation, the single class. Let's take a step toward Russia, which is taking so many towards us, etc. But within the enlarged reality that conditions these islands, exploitation grows constantly harsher. Lack is arranged in the most scientific of ways. Final solutions of the Jewish problem variety are prepared down to the last detail, and the Third World is organized as an integral part of capitalism. The reproduction of the interior limits of capitalism on an always wider scale has several consequences. It permits increases and improvements of standards at the center. It displaces the harshest forms of exploitation from the center to the periphery, but also multiplies enclaves of overpopulation in the center itself, and easily tolerates the so-called socialist formations. It is not kibbutz-style socialism that troubles the Zionist state, just as it is not Russian socialism that troubles world capitalism. There is no metaphor here. The factories are prisons. They do not resemble prisons. They are prisons. I really don't like metaphor. What can I say? Yeah, has Foucault's entered the chat? To a point. There's a little bit in here that starts deviating more than a little. But yeah, it's you can see where Deleuze and Foucault get along extremely well, and why they were fast friends as well. We're just going to end up going through this bit by bit because there's a lot of references and a lot of lines and a lot of really cute sort of phrasing. But the big things to be thinking about are the capitalist machine, the larger scale socius, the larger scale social field, and the way it's organized and what seems to be the causation of it, those things. Just be thinking about that as we go. Yeah, we'll get through it. In the capitalist formation of sovereignty, the full body of capital money is the socius. The great social axiomatic has replaced territorial codes and despotic overcodings that... Sorry, that's the wrong paragraph. I'm reading the wrong paragraph. I'm just awful today. I'm just terrible today. Just terrible. Where am I? Why are my notes on the wrong page? One moment, sorry. There's not one of these aspects, just wild. What the fuck happened? My PDF's all fucked up. I lost a page. God damn it. I hate when this happens. One moment. Unbelievable. Just one of those days. All right. Stress. Always fun. There is not one of these aspects, not the least operation, the least industrial or financial mechanism, that does not reveal the insanity of the capitalist machine and the pathological character of its rationality. Not at all a false rationality, but a true rationality of this pathological state. This insanity, the machine works too, believe me. All right, the aspects they are referring to, as they've been going through, and we just went through with science, in the capitalist formation of sovereignty, full body capital money, the great social axiomatic has replaced the territorial codes and despotic overcodings in its previous paragraph. The way that this functions and how it operates is kind of the underlying bits they're talking about here. So when they say there's not one of these aspects, they're referring to the previous paragraphs and setups, the fundamental things within it, that the contradictions of capitalism, the eternal paradox of capitalism, the things that at its basic level fuck with us constantly. The rationality of capitalism is its madness. This is not about it being a corruption of rationality. Again, there is no objectively rational, oh, this would be true, this is the way to consider it, this is the setup. That's not really the thing that they're driving at. It's the way that every mechanism of capitalism, and they talk about not the least operation, the least industrial or financial mechanism. There's industrial production, financial operations, all of these things. These elements manifest this insane rationality. And that's kind of the phrasing that they're going to keep driving at, because that's the push. The distinction is not in capitalism between a false rationality, which would be the critique of ideology, the Zizek'ian sort of thing, and the true rationality of the pathological. Capitalism isn't irrational in a rational world. Rationality is organized insanity. Yeah. The machine works too, believe me, this is a Beckett. There's a couple Beckett references in here. The machine works too is the pathology of it sort of coming out. The machine works too. That'd be the phrasing they're sort of driving at. And I'm 99% sure it's Beckett. The gray-haired man is a Beckett line. There's a few things in here that sort of are going to be coming out. When they say insanity, in the English, the way that they talk about madness, it's important that they're referencing, and they're very particular about this in the French. It doesn't carry through as much because it's in English, we tend not to have words that sort of denote clinical insanity versus sort of everyday sanity. So if I were to say, oh, he's gone mad, I tend not to mean that he's actually lost his mind and should be committed. When I say someone is insane, I tend not to mean that. But they're really specifically referring to the non-clinical version of it. This is what they're talking about, everyone. That the existence of the society is the pathological state, is the madness. It is the pathology of all of us as a thing. Right? Yeah. And the phrase, the machine works too, believe me, is in the original French. I just have my note here. It actually translates better as because the machine functions. The machine works too is not really, it's confusing language. Because the machine works, because it functions. Calling back to not just Beckett, but Kafka in the Penal Colony, the machine functions because it functions. You'll hear me say this. This is the shared insanity, and you're free to find a way to disagree as a thing, but it does, to an extent, work it's hard not to say that this works in some capacity. It's falling apart constantly, but we've got food in grocery stores. People were getting diabetes medication. We have internet running. So it works. When I say that, I'm not, why? No one here is like, no, it doesn't. It's broken, but it works. Does it? Because that's kind of the point they're making, is that the way that the system is manifesting is not functional. Things happen inside of it, and we have the stories of how they come about and how they work. But it is this pathological state. It is this insanity that they're driving at. And they continue, the capitalist machine does not run the risk of becoming mad. It is mad from one end to the other and from the beginning. And this is the source of its rationality, which is, I fucking love that. Instead of thinking about capitalism as, oh, it's this rational system that went off course. 2008 financial crisis, it went offline. They went off the rails. It's weird. That's just weird stuff. No. It's not that it goes mad through corruption or crises that sort of are fitting it. Madness is the condition of capitalism. It's the whole thing. It's not some weird state at one point or another. It is, in total, absolutely fucked up and completely irrational and not just irrational, mad. How I read the difference between the two, and they kind of go into this a bit, it's less that it's irrational doing anything. That'd be chaotic. It's less chaos, and it's more the entire process is itself mad. It is disconnected from itself and driving in a particular direction. It is not a rational kernel with layers of irrational shells. Madness is the systemic function inside of it. And he says, this is Marx's black humor. One sec. Erwin says, maybe I'm off here, but is this why so many people fall into the trap of seeing some of the insanity of capitalism as the broken bits of it for the exploited bits of it rather than national work? Yes, you're kind of getting to the end of the paragraph and a bit more, but that's the idea they're talking about. Is it's like, I had this discussion where I mentioned to someone, there's a really weird thing when it comes to merch. When you do merch, I did DGQC merch, and I spent a year trying to source the entire thing. Hassan the streamer, it was a news story a little bit ago where he got a unionized factory for manufacturing his merch, which good on him. That's not an easy thing to do. But I was like, hey, I want to be able to, I don't want any exploitation. Is there a way I can make something with no exploitation? Even if the shirts are expensive, just to have merch would be kind of cool where it's like, this is non-exploitation merch. There are a couple stanchions of it where it's like, the first thing is the printers don't have the fucking clue about where their ink comes from. It's not how it works. So they'll give you their source. They don't know where the material comes from for the shirt. They don't know where their shirts come from. But they're sourced from a place that isn't exploitative. Okay, cool. Go to those guys. Hey, your core materials, the commodified materials of the t-shirt, the cotton or linen or whatever the fuck, as well as on the other side, the actual pigments and everything. Where do you source them? They don't know, or they don't want to know. There's no end-to-end way to find out, is there exploitation in a system? Because if you don't know, it's all horrifying. At the very end of that commodification chain, where someone's making orange dye or cotton is being picked and dealt with, hasn't changed drastically in the last 200 years. The end process has the ability for us to stack really cool shit of those commodities on top of each other until we get to a really great point. One sec. I think, why is the tip, did the tip play? Why is the tip not playing in here? Suresh, thank you very much. For what is the quote? Everyone doing their own thing in their place, lost in their ecstasy as their job. It's not far off. Because once you get to the end of it, all of the little bits of everything, we've figured out how to, do really cool complex things with lithium. But a lithium mine, not great. None of this is great. So when you're talking about like, oh, the system works, look at how great our lives are. it is literally building this massive pyramid of people and products that themselves may not be exploitative. The manufacturing of an iPhone could be done in places and in ways that aren't brutally exploitative. That doesn't fix anything. Nike's being made in factories that aren't by children, that doesn't fix that there aren't children in the supply line. At all. At all. It's all fucked. We're fucked. The system is broken fundamentally, but it works. It works, guys. Guys, it works. It works. Noah says, it's interesting here, D&G seem to be foreclosing certain opportunities under capitalism. They admit there are material gains, but note there is a fundamental trade-off. Is it not possible to create better forms of governance, though? Well, that's what we'll get there, because that's in this paragraph, Noah. Capitalism is internally rational, but viewed externally it is madness. Oh, even internally, it's madness. It's all madness. That's kind of their point. So they go on with Marx. Marx's black humor, the source of capital, is his fascination with such a machine, how it came to be assembled, on what foundation of decoding and deterritorialization, how it works, always more decoded, always more deterritorialized, how its operation grows more relentless with the development of the axiomatic, the combination of flux, how it produces terrible single class of gray gentlemen, is another great reference, who keep up the machine, how it does not run the risk of dying all alone, but rather of making us die, provoking to the very end investments of desire that do not even go by way, it's a fucking long sentence, do not even go by way of deceptive and subjective ideology, and that lead us to cry out to the very end, long live capitalism, in all its reality, all its objective dissimulation. That's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot. So, Marx wrote himself about his sort of, say the black humor, we could also call fascinated horror. It doesn't have to be humor in the sense of like dirty jokes or anything, but, I meant more explanations. No, Mark, I know. I was just restating. That's all. Marx's fascination with it, his horrific fascination, isn't critique from the outside. That's not what Marx was doing. That's not how that worked. It was very much within, immersed in. As they've said before, he didn't write it like on a whim. This isn't a book of poetry that he wrote, looking at a mountain. He's within capital. He poured over in and out sheets, time sheets, purchase orders, the functional documentation of entire industries. He would pour over this as part of capital. He was immersed within it. And the systematization of the entire thing was the horror he found. And the reason I read the entire sentence is because it's listing out all of the things that were part of why he was so fascinated. And each of them is sort of a how. The first is the assembly on decoding and deterritorialization, right? The phrasing he works, how it came to be assembled, on what foundation of decoding and deterritorialization. This is the first one. It's the decomposing codes of the feudal systems or the despotic systems that came from there. Then it's the intensification of the axiomatics, which is as capital gained more rigorous control from, like, with these axioms, these mathematical like axioms, these abstract odd notions that seem to precede and replace codes as a thing. The production of the gray gentleman, the gray men, which is I think a Lawrence reference. They've had it before, but it's this way that there is this single class of people that are capital's functionaries. They're the management class, the bureaucrats, and capitalists themselves. And their job is, and as they see themselves, they maintain the system. They are the warden in the penal colony of Kafka. Their job is maintenance. So the gray gentlemen are maintenance. And then also that there's not capitalism's death, but our own death. The system doesn't really auto-critique or auto-destroy. It doesn't die of its own accord or under its own weight. Instead, we die and we sacrifice through libidinal investment within the system. This is not a deceptive ideology. This is not false consciousness. This is not a critique of ideology. They're saying that there is a direct libidinal cathexis investment of capital itself. We love how the system works. We desire capital. We invest in capital in its reality, not despite these things, but through the way it dissimulates the objectivities of things. The fetishism in objective, not subjective. We do this. We put ourselves into this thing. And we do it not in a way that's like, oh, they're mistaken. No, you're not mistaken. You're not mistaken. It's a good drug. Actually, probably a better way to talk about it would be to compare it to things like heroin and other shit. Because if you think that people do hard drugs and get addicted to things because they're weak, right? Or because they just don't understand it. Oh, they do. They do. It's just that that's better. It works for them. That's capitalism, more or less. Yeah. But they say, except in ideology, there has never been a humane, liberal, paternal capitalism. Better written, there has never been except in ideology. There's never been except in ideology, because that's kind of their point, is it's within this abstract. It's welfare capitalism, social democracy, capitalism with the human face is narrativizing bullshit. For them, ideology here is not as we would normally talk about it, but they're talking about like this imaginary representation that misrecognizes the real functional relations of things. So except in ideology, the way that like you have this weird abstract, purely idealistic thing, that doesn't work. Keynesianism as a thing, market freedom, Ayn Rand, paternalism, maternalism, corporate welfare or individual welfare, all of this. This is not any of this. There's never been a humane, liberal, paternal capitalism. It always has all these functions. Yeah, they're critiquing Mills here. Well, they're critiquing a lot of people here, to be frank. But it's like, it's all fucked. Because, and they go on, capitalism is defined by a cruelty having no parallel in the primitive system of cruelty, a terror having no parallel in the despotic regime of terror. The way I translate this is a little bit different. It's capitalism is defined by a cruelty without common measure. And it's not having no parallel. The phrase that they're using, sans commune mesure, is that they're explicitly stating it's not that it's a parallel. Oh, that works like this. It's that it doesn't even come close to amounting to the level of it, the measure of it. The terror that existed within despotic regimes isn't even close to the terror of capitalism. There's no common measure. There's no way to talk about it as a thing. Capitalism's relationships to social formations exist through a really crazy discontinuity, and we confuse it quite a bit. They talked through chapter 3, going through the primitive and despotic formations of things. And we're aware of this. And the stuff that they tend to talk about, people don't really object to, is the primitive formations worked through cruelty of bodily inscription, through initiation rituals, through brutal coding of every existence. And then the despotic worked through terror, the state apparatus, the king having total and unmeasured and unmitigated political domination, and overcoding. Capitalism is not really doing it in the same way. It's not really cruelty and it's not really terror, because it's not like they have nothing in parallel. That's the way it's translated. But there is no common measure. It is incommensurable. Incommensurable. This is not a quantitative difference. It is not that there is more cruelty and terror. It is that it is qualitatively incommensurable. It's a different kind of social suffering entirely. Does that make sense? I'm kind of over-explaining the sentence, but what can I say? It has no parallel in the primitive system of cruelty. By a terror, it's not this and this. It's unrelated. It doesn't work the same fucking way at all. There's functionally just a very different way of doing it. And they say, because they give examples, wage increases and improvements in the standard of living are realities. Right? Of course they are. They just look around. It's crazy. Look at this. I'm a fucking normal dude. I have a bookshelf like this and a TV that, look at how big my TV is. Holy shit. That's crazy. But realities that derive from a given supplementary axiom that capitalism is always capable of adding to its axiomatic in terms of an enlargement of its limits. Let's create a new deal. Let's cultivate and recognize strong unions. Let's promote participation, single class. Let's take a step towards Russia, which is taking so many towards us. This was written at a time he ain't talking about now, because Russia ain't taking those steps. He's talking about at the time in France specifically, less in America. But the USSR was making efforts to sort of reach out post-Stalin as things were shifting and as the world stage was shifting. Well, let's reach out. Let's have these conversations. Let's talk a little bit more. They're able to work with communist governments. The one now would be we should have lots of trade deals with the communists in China. I know they're not communists. I'm not getting into the fight, but this is the thing they're talking about. The way that capitalism doesn't demand or require that we adhere to this libertarian Ayn Randian laissez-faire bullshit. That capitalism doesn't give a fuck about any of that. It is incredibly flexible because, again, it's about the relations of things unto themselves. The bigger system is almost irrelevant to itself. So wage increases are real. These aren't like illusory reforms. They don't want to go down that road. And there's a lot of people who have gone down that road. There's no real increase in the standard of living. Really? It's like China brought 1 billion people out of poverty in my lifetime. That's pretty crazy. Like abject, brutal, eating your own shit poverty. That's real. It's real. It's not an illusion. But the function exists in this way because of how capitalism expands. It expands and it does these things, but it's a little bit different. It's again, the axiomatic is the term that they're using, this mathematical thing. Axiomatic, the underlying rule for any given set. This is formal systems theory as a thing. New axioms can be added. They don't change the other axioms necessarily, but they change what is happening within sort of the set of itself. It doesn't change the fundamental structure of the set, though. So every reform we add, they say New Deal, unions, working with Russia, whatever, is an axiom addition that enlarges the limits of capital, but doesn't transcend it. The New Deal didn't break capitalism. It works within capital, and they add that to the thing. The structure. Let's create, let's cultivate, they do this, add this. This is the phrasing they're using is particular. It's the sort of technocratic management of capitalism, right? That they're referring to here. Let's take a step towards Russia. Let's promote this. Let's cultivate. Let's build this. Let's do that. But within the enlarged reality that conditions these islands, exploitation grows constantly harsher. Lack, arranged in the most scientific of ways, final solutions of the Jewish problem variety are prepared down to the last detail, and the third world is organized as an integral part of capitalism. One second, just looking over the French, because I have a note that there's a thing here. Yeah, all right. Yeah. All right. It's just awkward reading. Sorry. Someday I'll be able to be faster with it. They seem to be mixing fascism and capitalism here. I'm a bit surprised with their analysis. I'm not sure they're mixing fascism and capitalism here. I don't see that. Give me a second to get through the paragraph, and we'll have an open discussion. So. The enlarged reality that conditions these islands, the New Deal, strong unions, things like that. Within the enlarged reality that conditions these islands, exploitation grows constantly harsher. The enlarged reality is the expanded limits of capitalism that we just went over, the expanded limits that the axiomatic adds. It allows new things to be added so capitalism can ever continue to grow. The New Deal enabled new types of capture. Like, that's literally what it did. People had more money in America to spend. Good for those guys. They got money. They got a lot of good houses. People were able to buy land. People were able to do all sorts of things. Like, good for them. They got good things. But that doesn't come at nothing in capitalism. The internal relation that existed there, that expanded limit that had to be added, encompassed even more. And intensified, to be perfectly frank. So even with wage increases, people are making more money now on average than they ever have in America. However, the surplus value extraction has increased exponentially with that. A lot of people tend to think about all of this in terms of the factory worker, but that's not the way to think about any of this. It's literally what every person is putting in their labor for, and then the value that labor has in general. If there's a team of 12 scientists and engineers and metalworkers who build robot arms for Tesla factories, and they design that and build that, even if they get paid millions of dollars each of them, the amount of money that's being made by the capitalist who owns the company, who's now going to be worth $1 trillion, that is not commensurable. That doesn't work. Like, the amount of surplus value being extracted is natural, is part of the process, that it becomes extensively larger in a massive way. Like a huge fucking way. Lack is arranged scientifically. The phrasing that they're using here is really fascinating. Scarcity as a thing, as we experience it, lack, they mean lack in the sort of larger scarce thing, is bureaucratically produced. It is not a natural extension of things. Lack is scientifically arranged. Here are the areas that we need to have less shit. Right? And it's arranged scientifically. The phrasing is so great. It's organized shortages. As I've said, the last few years, humanity made enough food. Like, that's all it... So wait, why, if that's the case, what the fuck? Why is a third of the world starving? Well, we made enough food. It just doesn't go where it needs to go. So scarcity is produced as part of those internal relations of capital. It's lack as scientifically being arranged. And the final solution, this is not even, they're not fucking around at all here. Like genocide as administrative rationality, this is, I mean, we're seeing it now. Like we're literally seeing it now in America. But not just America. Pick a place. Go have fun. We don't think of these things directly as that until they get to a certain point. But that's what we're doing. Final solutions across the world. It's eliminating all of this. And the third world is organized as an integral part of capitalism. If you don't think that, if you haven't watched like some of those like crazy videos, and again, I recommend them all the time. My least favorite, I say my least favorite, it's the one I tend to send, so I guess you could say my favorite, is sulfur mining. Go watch sulfur mining. And yeah. Coca-Cola in Africa. I mean, the death squads that Coke has hired in multiple countries is itself kind of telling. But again, that's not an aberrant thing. It is part of the setup here. That is how capitalism functions. This is the core function of the way the system works. That when we are at the point where it's all purely these little relations, and we're building a larger system out of it, this is kind of how those things get directed. Just as we get directed with goals or the fascising process, capitalism is always moving towards that profit number go up. This is the default setup. It seems like DNG are making an assumption here that each material game requires more exploitations. The advancement of tech, new policies, etc. have reduced hunger globally. This is the fun part. Let's say we figured out, and I think it's possible for capitalism to figure out how to kind of eliminate hunger. Does that mean there's less exploitation? That means there's less of the overt, terrifying exploitation that we see and that makes us sad when we have to donate $1 to feed a child in Africa. But exploitation is the system. That's the setup. Again, if we get to the point where, let's say, we're not doing this anytime soon, but let's say we have robots that just can do everything suddenly. Great. Does that mean that there's no exploitation? I'm not talking about AI. Fuck off with that. I'm talking about like with people. Because at what point is everyone getting the actual fruit of their own labor? Because that's like kind of what this comes back to. The abstraction of labor and the understanding of labor is the actual effort that's being made. Are you being exploited just because you're making perfectly fine money? A team of 3 people can put out a video game for a company that will make millions of dollars. They would get paid, and they got paid $200,000, $300,000 salaries, maybe a nice bonus, a couple weeks off paid vacation. Are they not exploited? They might be exploitation, but they're claiming that's increasing though. That is increasing exploitation. Just because their lives aren't nightmarish hellholes doesn't mean that it's not more exploitative. Someone who's being exploited of millions of dollars worth of excess labor. Like, for example, there's so many of them. People who create automations, people who build open source systems, Java. There's so many little things where it's like the amount of exploitation that's happening to any single person, like, it doesn't mean there's less exploitation. It's less suffering in the way we talk about it, but not less alienation. Exploitation grows constantly harsher. It is. Oh, and at the periphery, it's getting even worse as it expands and as it grows, and it will continue to. We're at a point where we almost have a saturation of capital, like globally. It's really fascinating. But that at the edges of capitalism, it is not good. And it's getting worse and worse. I'm waiting for, in the next couple of years, I fully expect Africa to become the new sort of outsourcing capital, because Southeast Asia is getting too expensive and India is getting too expensive. The Middle East is doing its best to try to bring in Africa. That's a big thing for Saudi Arabia, for the UAE, and all these guys. So when Africa becomes an outsourcing capital, which it's already started, by the way, it's already happening. I know, but I'm just saying, like, at some point, we're going to start seeing the same factories. We're going to start seeing the same setup. And then what? Then where does it move? How does it set up? It's going to be fascinating to watch. But again, at the edges, there's a brutality that exists that's very much part and parcel, but the entire system has grown in its exploitative quotient, I think. I'm trying to respond to Noah. It is absolutely still growing. Let me finish the paragraph and then we'll keep going. The reproduction of the interior limits of capitalism on an always wider scale has several consequences. It permits increases and improvements of standards at the center, displaces the harshest forms of exploitation from the center to the periphery, and also multiplies enclaves of overpopulation in the center itself and easily tolerates the so-called socialist formations. It is not kibbutz-style socialism that troubles the Zionist state, just as it is not Russian socialism that troubles world capitalism. There is no metaphor here. The factories are prisons. They do not resemble prisons. They are prisons. So metropolitan centers of things, life will improve, generally speaking. But we move our brutal exploitation to third world countries, colonies, colonial situations, all of that. But within these enclaves, within this, like a super exploitation grows. There are ghettos, there is immigrant slave labor, there is internal colonization that is happening. Like, it's a lot. The phrasing that they use, and again, this is why I go over it, also multiplies enclaves of overpopulation in the center itself. It's really not overpopulation. And again, I have no idea why they would use this term. It's super exploitation. Is the word that's actually right there. Sura exploitation, which is like mega exploitation. It is not surpopulation. It is surexploitation. So it is not overpopulation. It is an extreme version of overexploitation that begins working at the centers. And that's the setup. The super exploitation that begins happening there. It increases the ghettoization, the poverty, public housing in the shittiest ways. Come to America and see how public housing works. All of these things, they happen, and inside of that, in these little enclaves. It's a overexploitation. Overexploitation works, but it is a more extensive exploitation that is taking place, is the point. And so when you start talking about these sort of systems and the setup, it is that capitalism is able to reproduce its limits internally. When they say that, they mean, hey, do you know those really, really poor areas that we used to really exploit for all of our labor? Why don't we do that here? More or less. More or less. Ben says, I don't know how true it is. I heard China's losing jobs to Africa faster than America losing jobs to China. It's very true. China's put in a lot of money in Africa. It's going to be really fascinating over the next decade as Africa wakes up, because it is a massive country with a huge amount of problems thanks to white people. How you doing? We really know how to set a fire that's going to really spread for decades and generations. That thing is going to be really weird to watch as Africa comes into its own. It's going to be very strange. Did I say county? What, Ben? What did I say? It's a running joke. I'm sorry. Is it? No one's heard me make that joke before? That's fine. Africa is The running joke, and this happened because of a person a couple years ago who kept calling it a country in the server. That's the joke. God damn it. Irony just doesn't work on any of you fucking people. Noah says, not criticizing you, Brooks. Yes, you are. You specifically are aiming directly at me, and I take it personally. It's more so D&G seem to be mitigating the importance of material gains under capitalism and are saying it's cruel and terrifying in ways that don't remain parallel to primitive and despotic societies. Seem to be mitigating the importance of material gains under capitalism and saying it's cruel and terrifying in ways.
I mean, I could say it if it's easier. Like,
please, dear God.
I'm not obviously going to take like a stance that I'm like pro or anti-cap or whatever. I feel like a lot of their analysis tends to be pretty descriptive about particular flows of desire and whatnot. But I guess I'm just a little confused as to how they can kind of conclude that if we have a material gain, i.e. something like the New Deal, workers' rights or whatever, that exploitation grows much harsher, it gets displaced to developing countries and whatnot. Of course, that does happen, but I don't see why that's like necessary or integral to capitalism, because we can look at stats and really good debates about how within capitalism, we are able to get food to places quicker. We're able to get pandemic relief stuff faster because of the ways in which we're able to innovate. There's really good evidence also about like decoupling and how companies are rushing towards renewable energy and will be forced to with an economic incentive. I'm not saying like I agree with all of it, but with the, invention of like AI and how fast it's moving, it just seems a little odd to me that they're able to say like, hey, everyone, a fourth socius is, potentially going to come into existence and whatnot. But we can't imagine a form of capitalism where exploitation goes in the other direction. It just seems a little like odd. Like, again, I'm not like hyper-capitalist or whatever. It's just more so that like, I don't see why material gains aren't like fundamentally possible here. Like with exploitation.
So the first answer I would give would be if we're talking about capitalism, it's a particular system. They're very particular about what that system is. It is the way that capital itself, as the fount of things, is both the political, the meaning generation, the center of it, and basically the mediator of value between all relations of any things. That way that capital functions is the sort of thing that's doing it. The same way the despotic is the king, the fount of meaning and the locus of the X and Y, the filiative and the alliant. The same way that the earth is what is crisscrossed with lines of the filiative alliant. The recording surface is the deal for them, the recording surface of the social, and that is capital that records all value changes between sort of anything. When we talk about the way that exploitation's gotten worse, I think it is okay for us to be saying, here's how I read what they're saying. When we talk about that the axiomatic intensifies exploitation through its capacities, despite gains, that what we have on the one side, real wages, post-war U.S. real wages absolutely have gone up and it's great. But the rise in productivity has way fucking far outpaced anything that has been gains. Anything. Compensation's gone up like 100% since 1950. Productivity's up on average 250%. That is stolen. That is more qualitatively, quantitatively, however you want. That is more exploitation. Period. Capital is extracting more surplus value per hour from people than it ever has, even though it gives back nominally higher wages and living conditions. So the rate of exploitation has increased significantly. But even since the book, and again, I would be very, I think I can make this argument. I'm going to try. You tell me where we disagree, Noah. But post-1970s financialization has been fucking insane. At first, we started with this idea that credit liberated us. I'm not joking. If you go back and you see how people wrote about it, like credit cards, loans, like seemed to give people access to home ownership, car ownership, higher education, things that were gatekept by the wealthy originally. But actually, it bound everyone to this weird fucked up debt servitude that is underneath it. The Lazarato's book, The Making of the Indebted Man, goes very nice into this. Jean-Claude Martin's Debt, phenomenal. Debt slavery, really fucking good. So even if we have gains, and there are gains, like they're literally not saying that it's like, hey, this is bad. It's like, no, there's good that's come of it. I am not dying of dysentery at 35. I'm not worried about my children dying of dysentery. Like, as a simple thing, there are people in the world who are. But exploitation doesn't just mean, hey, you get to live an okay life. It's like, no, it's, again, the amount of exploitation is massive. But beyond that, in the last 10 or 15 years, the idea that cognitive labor and how it's been sort of dealing with things and how that's been exploitative is so fucking insane at a level that's hard for me to even start getting at it. So as we have moments where I don't know, hey, isn't it great that people in Bangladesh are being paid $3 a day versus the 20 cents they were making? Sure, but their living conditions marginally improved, but the amount of capital that's being made off of that in that entire process across that entire supply chain is so fucking massive. So fucking massive. Do you get what I'm saying,
I mean,
Noah?
I totally hear you. And I think, like, I'm not denying, like, how, the World Bank and IMF have, like, fucked over developing countries and how people are massively underpaid and whatnot. It's just, I guess it also just might be my use of their word harsher here, just because, we do have, like, evidence from the United Nations. We have evidence from all sorts of stats that show, like, percentages about, like, food insecurity going down and things along those lines. So I guess I'm just, like, a bit skeptical of some claims that, like, it's just getting harsher. And I think that's a debate to be had. But I think and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, it seems like exploitation just might operate differently. Like, even though my quality of life might be better now than before, I have Slack on my phone and my boss has the ability to call me at any time in any place. And it's just like, I'm now constantly being exploited in different types of ways. If that is what they mean by harsher, but I think I would just 100% push back, because I feel like I've seen enough debates and, like, I mean, you know my job. It's just like, you can do a lot of good research.
So let me ask, what do you see as being oppressed within capital?
As being oppressed?
Yes.
Well,
what is the thing that's being exploited?
I mean, I would say the worker. And
that is the capitalist version. Let's try Anti-Oedipus. What's being exploited?
What's being exploited in AO? Geez, I mean, I still would probably say, like, under the socius, the worker.
It's libido. It's desire. Desire is being entrapped and ensnared, and it is being made to serve the large gregarious formations.
Yeah, it constantly, like, displaces its limit in order to generate surplus. But, like, look at, like, laws, like Marx's law of counteracted tendency that they mention. Like, obviously, you can't exploit a machine over and over and over again, so you have to exploit the worker. But machines are getting better. Like, I just don't see why they're not envisioning a world where, there is the potentiality of capitalism to continuously innovate to where robots can start to do the work. I mean, we're kind of seeing. Oh no,
I can answer this. So when robots start doing, let's say we get to the point that robots are actually doing all the work, and there's one guy somewhere who has to press the on button. How does capital handle that? Now, there's the fantasy. Let's even go the more extreme version of it, which is, and then we've nationalized the plants, I guess, and the state gives everyone a stipend based on how much value it's generated. How at what point is this, like, not still deeply exploitative, because that guy still has to be pushing that button, because the amount of value that's being created, where is all the way down? Robots are having to be made. Well, who's building the robots to make those? And then who's putting...
But, like, I just feel like the quality and conditions can be better, because, like, making a robot now versus in 100 years where there might be easier and better tech to use is a better quality of life. Well, pushing a button is a lot easier than your fingers.
Right. Life gets easier. Great. At what point do you think that we will gain the freedom to do whatever we want and to exist as we want? without being determined by capital and controlled and subjugated by capital.
But I mean, I just don't think it matters. Like, I think the point being made here is that they're trying to make a claim that, like, comparative to the primitive and the despotic, capitalism.
Why doesn't it matter?
Because it's just a question about their analysis here about whether or not material gains will always lead to increasing exploitation, which is what they're saying. And is that just not a debatable thing that we can, like, use stats to analyze and look at, like, quality of life and potential decoupling under capitalism to...
Well, I mean, so at this point, let's talk about it as it exists rather than in fantasies of the future. Right now, you and I have a pretty fucking good quality of life. In fact, chances are everyone watching the stream is pretty much doing okay in comparison to how we might have been 50 or 100 years ago. I think that's generally, unless you like happen to be born into a wealthy family, 100 years ago was a very different beast. Stories from my family was coal miners and farm workers 100 years ago. That existence still better than 100 years before that, then 100 years before that, then 100 years before that. So like, this is what you're talking about. Like, this is a better improvement on life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do we have that? Like, literally, what is the thing that enables us to have that?
Of course, like exploiting individuals to produce a
not
product.
just a minor amount of exploitation, an exceptional
a ton
amount.
of it. Yeah, of course. Like, and I'm not trying to mitigate that. Like, the way we treat people is awful. To be clear to everyone here, like, I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that I don't see why we can't further progress to where we don't have to have people, picking food in the field, and we could just have robots instead.
So I would say they wouldn't disagree with that. But they don't think that we're stuck in capitalism forever. Like, that's not it. But all of what we've just talked about is the process of how capitalism records, claims that meaning, and then how meaning is made through the representational nature of how desire is. This is why the desire thing is important, because as desire is crushed, as we become not subject groups, but subjugated groups, as we find ourselves in line and working towards the maintenance of the group as a thing, and the maintenance of that thing as the thing, and the maintenance of capital as ultimately the thing that we all end up coming back to, desire is consistently imprisoned and trapped and played within this symbolic order and representational order that pushes us towards this thing. Now, do we need? No, we don't. None of this is tautologically, teleologically the way man has to be. This is how we exist in time. And in time, because we exist in a capitalist system that was built like this and works like this and functions like this, you and I are probably fucked. Will we be able to eventually figure out what the next thing is, just as at one point they didn't foresee that we could get rid of kings? Because the king could just kill you for fun. Now we've got a system where the king can't really just kill you for fun. As much as Donald Trump would like to shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and get away with it, we're not quite at that point. Not really. And we're also not really at the next point where there isn't a brutal domination of power and control, which we exist in, period. So that place we're in, sure, things can change, but the system of capitalism, the way it functions, this is part and parcel of the entire thing. No?
I mean, I think what you said is good. I just don't, and again, this just might be like my thing about them saying like exploitation is harsher than before. I'm like, I guess like that could have like a variety of kind of like meanings. Like, I'm not saying that like in capitalism you can get rid of exploitation completely. I think it's just more of a question of like, it seems like they're just mitigating some material gains when it's like, I mean, maybe there's a trade-off in another area or something. I guess like in what you're trying to say, it's like if we help get food to people, well, now you're exploiting someone that's getting them the food, right? Like a truck driver or something, for example. But I mean, I still think we can improve the quality of life by making better trucks and by self-driving vehicles or whatever.
But here's the thing: all of the stuff you're talking about is at the very end. It is to put another way, it is the representation of a supply chain.
But I don't think that's the end. I think we're in it now because I think today.
No. Stop. You misunderstood me. Let me say it another way. The food for a truck driver is a representation of a supply chain. That is the end of, there's a consumptive moment. That's consumption. That's the end of the line for a whole bunch of shit, unless we do something with the guy's poop after he eats it. So when we have someone who's serving a truck driver, that is the end of the line of the supply chain. The representation of that supply chain is that food, but everything that goes into that meal. And when we talk about everything, we're talking about ingredients, we're talking about process, we're talking about energy, we're talking about the entire global supply chain that is needed for that hamburger to be given to that truck driver, for that truck driver to be driving a truck, all of the manufacturing, all of the parts, the entirety of that massive thing, the mass amount of labor that goes into every single tiny little piece is infinitely more exploitative than anything before. They're absolutely right on that. And that's a supply chain conversation, because I have a computer and I get to use my computer, and me buying it from a guy at Best Buy, that's not really exploitative. I bought my computer from, I built my own, but I bought all the parts from like companies here, and it was like a guy on Newegg and then Amazon and then Best Buy sold me stuff. Great. That's not really exploitation. No. It's not really exploitation. But again, the computer's the representational element of a long chain of connecting elements that are horrifyingly exploited. Every single piece of that as you go down, all the tiny pennies of the $1,000, $5,000 purchase, whatever, all of those things is insane. When you talk about every level of everything that needed to be put in place for me to have this computer, it isn't just made by some person. The parts aren't just made by some person. The pieces aren't just made by some person. It's all the little things. And all the little things have more and more exploitation that increases exponentially as you go out. A t-shirt can be made by a person, but they didn't make the cloth.
Okay, yeah, so it's comparative worlds though, right? Like this world where you're able to buy the computer, versus another world where you can buy the computer, but a policy is passed that makes it so one person in that chain is not as hungry as they would have been in another world, right? So it's like, I think that the material gains that they are admitting are possible. Like they're not making an argument that like the state is fundamentally
wait. So I get that, but now let's just take it to where you're talking. Everyone isn't allowed. We eliminate exploitation. We just say, you can't have things where people aren't paid fair wages, where they aren't gaining the lion's share of their own labor. We just say that. And let's say God comes out, makes the law, and everyone starts following it. The system cannot function. Like, it won't work. Capitalism won't work. A computer can't be bought that isn't exploitative. It is far too expensive. And all the people downwind, everything works, and then wages and capital and the amount of money I have to spend rise in with that. The economic system is self-reflexive. It doesn't have an objectivity outside of it. It is internally referential. And as it's internally referential and all these pieces come together, the value of a dollar, the value of a purchase, the change, no one person or one government can really set. They're doing what they can, but even if they do that, all the other things also change in relation to that. There's no outside objective capitalism. So if we were to say, all globally, we are going to make it so everyone who works in Sulfur Mines has everything that they need to be safe, and they only work 8-hour days, and they have all the equipment and all the safety stuff and all the technological advancements. We don't have robots for it yet, but hey, today we just did that. The cost of sulfur would explode, and it would immediately make everyone move to exploiting other minerals that we could use in its place. Or, like with blood diamonds, it would immediately push everyone to work with the few places who aren't doing that because they're undercutting costs. Like, the nature of every step, and this is the supply chain nightmare as you go down. When you get down to those commodities, there's nowhere that those commodities aren't exploitative in pretty horrifying ways.
Yeah, no, and I think that makes sense. I think, there's no doubt that capitalism schizophrenizes and it deterritorializes. It has to open new markets and it has to be creative in its method of displacing the limit for surplus. I think the only thing I'm trying to push back on, and we can move on. I don't want to take too much, but
I don't want to move on. This is the conversation.
Just the only thing I would push back on is sure, capitalism schizophrenizes. It can open new markets. It can, it's creative in how it does so. I just don't see why it can't be less exploitative in the process. I just still don't get how it has to be. Even the example of people getting paid a fair wage, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, good example. But I think that still proves that material gains are good. Less exploitation can happen.
Are all people going to get paid a fair wage? At that point, fair wage becomes a pointless conversation. Because if you changed everyone's wages, let's say a $15 global minimum wage suddenly hit, and the U.S. invaded every country, took it over, and enforced this. How do commodities function at that point?
Well, but then you continue to pass laws. You continue to regulate, and you continue to say, hey, you can't raise the prices of certain goods, like how maybe Bernie Sanders did with the bill for pharmaceuticals, or you can't raise it after a certain amount, right? Why not? I don't see why the law should not continuously be in a process that is simultaneous. I think that we just shouldn't forget that, the government and capitalism are not, intrinsic, there's still a government here is what I'm trying to say. So all of the issues that you're saying.
And we can pass whatever law. I'm saying, and my question is the knock-on effects economically within capital, because it is a self-referential system where value is determined by what people will pay using what at any given point. What would that do to the system at large? And the people have modeled a few of these things out, and it's hilarious because the moment you have everyone's a $15 minimum wage, we can do that in America. And America gets to have awesome $15 minimum wage, and everyone gets to have pizza and prostitutes and cocaine for free every night. And it's just like party land. To keep that happening necessitates the rest of the supply chain functioning in ways that we don't want to talk about. Every step, this is, again, and I'm going to do some work on this. This might be one of my next videos, because we're going through this Operation Inflation. We're trying to figure out how to do costumes. And they're made out of they're fucking tent material, parachute material, these inflatable costumes. But we buy them for $35 on Amazon, $40 on Amazon. Mostly from middlemen. So the middlemen buy them for $9 or $10 from China, from distributors there who buy them for $3 or $4 from factories. And every step of the way, it's not just those distributors. It's the shipping people, the truckers, the delivery people, all the secretaries, the bureaucracy of all of that, the government agents, the fucking customs, the tariffs, all of that, raise that. So when you start chasing it back, it's okay, you're the factory that actually makes these things. And you make them, and they only cost you, they cost you 50 cents to 75 cents a piece to make. You sell them for $3. Okay, but where do you get the material from? Oh, it comes from the factory down the street. And that is also a 50% mark. Once you start getting into that level, I would suggest it's a worthwhile thing. I think, I don't know if China's allowing visas from Americans anymore, but if you can go to Guangzhou or other provinces and actually go and see how manufacturing works in some of these places, there are very nice factories that people are working in that are much better than they've ever been in China. They're factories, so they're not my jam, but they're fine, they're great. But then you go just a couple more down, and it's those open air nightmares that you see on YouTube videos are suddenly everywhere. And those are the things that make the thread or the material that's turned into thread in the factory next door. And those factories are horrifying. That's exploitation that is very difficult to understand. But then you go even a step further where it's okay, well, what material is turned into this flat material that they're melting down? Oh, that comes from petroleum and these other things. Well, let's chase that down. And it just gets worse and worse as you go. And so as capitalism functions, the complexities of the system require exponential gains in exploitation in order to maintain a livable system overall. So when we get to have a perfectly adjustable, perfectly nice $50,000, $100,000 a year salary here in America, which is about average now, that's great. It isn't that we get those gains and that's in a vacuum. We get those gains because there's other places and other exploitation that's taking place far worse, where even more exploitation is enabling that money to pour into our systems. So yes, is there a way we could eventually legislate out all of those things? Sure. But then what's the thing? Because capitalism determines its value in that relation of any single purchase, any single trade, any single thing that we use this universal currency for. At what point does that fall apart when nothing has a value? No one's being paid in money anymore. Like, at what point are we in that really weird space of what, like teenagers think communism is, when it's not really that, where it's state-controlled capitalism, early China, early Russia. And at what point are those being determined? How do we know how much to make of any given thing? This is where it starts getting fun. How do we know how much diabetes medication to make? Oh, we take it's a poll. Here's how much we make. Cool. Where do we distribute it? Here's who needs it. Okay. Who works there? How many people do we need to make that much? These things. This channel has special permissions. Does this channel have special permissions? I don't know that. I have no idea what's happening. That you can't unmute. What are you talking about? Oh, Josh's. That's because of last week. You were walking and I kept asking and you didn't hear me. So I had to eventually serve a mute. You are muted. You are unmuted now. You can talk and say hi. I tried to catch you because I can't unmute you. You left and I can't unmute you when you leave. So I had to wait till you came back. Welcome back, Josh's.
Thank you. No problem. I did have a question.
Please.
So how would you respond to the claim that for much of the developing world, or whatever they call it now, there's been a tremendous decrease in poverty, that in fact, a lot of the difficulties that the American middle class has experienced in the last 30, 40 years are the mirror opposite of the tremendous gains that have been made by people in many other parts of the world that have been moved out of poverty and starvation. So that's kind of, I'm sure you've heard that argument many times.
Yes. I would return by saying that there is, again, I think I'm now trying to steelman the book because these are places where I think it's a worthwhile conversation. And right now, Jean-Claude Martin's Debt Slavery, I think, goes into this nicely, and I tend to very much agree for that. But it's not just that at the periphery is the only place exploitation occurs. We find it internally in those enclaves of over-exploitation, the supreme exploitation that begins to happen here. And I think in America, we're starting to see the outcome of that. But I would argue the EU isn't wildly far from this. There are pockets of ghettos and slave labor that are now part and parcel with the setup. Farm labor in America traditionally has been made up of illegal immigrants, immigrants without papers, however we want to phrase it, but people who come here, migrants who work for a summer and disappear and are treated horrifyingly. It's something like 75% experience assaults. Women who work on farms, it's like 1 in 2 experience sexual assault, like multiple times. It's awful. But as Trump has been a nightmare and has chased that off, they've actually replaced it with prison labor. And that's been a thing for the last decade they've been doing, because as our prison population grows, and it's massive, there's this really weird interplay in America that they've done where prisoners in a prison determine the actual power of voting. Even though they're not allowed to vote, it determines how many Congress people that county has. Enjoy that fact. And so the more prisoners you have, the more voting power you have. But at the same time, with the explosion of prisoners means that they can actually outsource them, and they take them to farms. They literally take prisoners to farms, very common, and they have them work the farms. And they do this on behalf of Monsanto and all these other guys. What you've got then is slavery, exploitation, where people are being paid 5 cents, 10 cents an hour, literally 5 or 10 cents an hour. I'm not exaggerating. That's what prisoners are paid, to clean the fields, to harvest, to to do various labor work. And they're already talking about the same thing and carrying through. RFK just put forward the idea that children who are, instead of going to juvie, or people who have mental problems or the homeless, we should work with them to rehabilitate them by having them work a farm. He said this, and they're pushing this policy because this is the thing that ends up happening. We don't really have any further to go. I said Africa, and yes, the country of Africa, my running joke, but it's a massive fucking place. And there's a huge amount of exploitation that has taken there traditionally. But Kenya, for example, has started doing incredible work in finance and actually building its own sort of systems up. And you're seeing incredible growth in terms of the non-nominal number of people who are not in poverty anymore. It's people are starting to live decently and well even. But that means that there's exploitation that's growing elsewhere. And so we're seeing in other areas of Africa that are taking that on, but also in America. South America, Europe is seeing the same thing with its immigrant populations. The exploitation takes place somewhere, and it's about creating pockets of it, enclaves, islands of it, whatever you want to say, in various places. But that has continued. China is actually really bad about this right now. There's a huge deal that's been happening there as the peripheries of China, as they've, Shanghai downtown. The first time I ever visited, someone told me if you wear a shirt or clothing, just be ready to throw it out when you leave because it'll be so covered in shit. They weren't lying. I had a suit jacket and a white shirt. And when I left, you could see the outline of where the suit was because the pollution had just covered shit. It was unfucking real. 10 years later, I went back a few times, but when I went back 10 years later, and the air's much better and they've moved the factories way further out. This is now happening internally to countries. We're seeing this here as well. So as that exploitation continues to occur, it's happening in pockets inside of countries, not really at the edges of capitalism anymore. So it's a really fascinating sort of setup. Sorry for the ramble. You there,
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. The other thing that occurred to me is sort of the extent to which, at least we have been led to assume, that there's a lot of political control over the distribution of the wealth. So you tend to sort of compare, say, how things were after World War II, and from that period up through the 60s, early 70s, where you didn't have billionaires, or at least, adjusted for inflation, because the taxes were up to what? There was a sort of, the upper bracket was something like 90%. And meanwhile, you had this growing middle class. And so there were decisions made, it was acceptable for a period of time to slap these enormous taxes on the wealthy, and then meanwhile in Europe, under these social democracies, that the decision was made for a lot of reasons. And I understood the main reason to be they had experienced so many centuries of just continuous warfare that it finally occurred to them the only way that they could achieve stability was to focus on this gigantic safety net. So for a period of time, they were also making a political decision, to have taxes be super high and have this enormous safety net, and have for the healthcare and schooling and all these things. So it was a decision. So somebody wanted a more competitive environment where they could sort of, succeed and reach the top and get all the reward from it. People would escape. They would leave England and they would leave European countries for the United States, where there was considered to be much less of a safety net, and yet you could rise to the top. So that was the narrative, right? I was just interested in having you speak against or critique that narrative.
Can you summarize slightly for me? Sorry, it was a lot, and I'm trying to get to one point of it. My brain is like chasing four of them.
I always do that. I get a little.
No, I love it. There's a lot of directions I can go, and I want to be able to go exactly where you're asking. So,
well, okay. So if I hone it down, I guess what I'm asking is, how would you argue against the idea that a lot of that in terms of I guess what I'm doing is I'm using that narrative to reinterpret exploitation as being something that is under the control of political policy. So if a government or if a culture decides that they want to sort of pour all their emphasis into the middle classes, or say the poor and the middle classes, and they want to they want to slight the 1% or the 10%, by slapping huge taxes on them, to benefit the middle classes and the lower classes, then they have a lot of leeway to do that, and so they can minimize exploitation. That it's a matter of it being a choice, a political choice. Does that make it any clearer?
Yeah, I think it's important for me, I think, to add to that, though, that these things necessarily exist in time. So let's take, everyone loves talking about the Nordic countries, and I do too, because I think it's a really fascinating, specific thing. When we talk about Sweden, when we talk about Norway, Finland, Denmark, these countries exist in a place where they have incredibly high taxes on the wealthy, and they do what they call like the Nordic system, where it's like they're very capitalist focused. I've worked for multiple public companies in Sweden. They're very capitalist focused, heavily regulated, and everyone there lives a pretty fucking good life, to be very frank. It's hard for me to say otherwise. I always loved, every time I would go to a new city in any of them, I would always ask a friend of mine who's there, be like, take me to the shittiest area of town where it's too dangerous. I want to see what you fucking think that is. As someone who I've walked Skid Row in LA, they don't fucking know and their areas are hilarious and adorable. The existence that is, it's like, oh, we can do this. It's like, can you? Because all of those things have two really big sort of historical realities behind them. One is they're all products of colonization on the good side of it, especially the Danish. They really had some really fun times for a few hundred years, and all of that wealth poured into their country, stolen, exploited, that they're able to use thanks to the current financial system. They can cut off exploitation directly. They don't have to be cutting the hands off of sugar cane farmers anymore, or murdering brown people. Now they just get to invest it in companies who kind of do that on their behalf. So they get to be at a distance, but that is still the horrifying reality. Like, again, if we talk about capital as the dead labor that's being reinvigorated, you're talking about basically zombies of the slaves that are currently powering the Danish economy. But also the second part, which is the natural resources. If you remove natural resources, oil, mining, all that other stuff, as well as remove financial sort of pre-1950s or 1960s finance, these countries do not function. They do not have a system that works. They do not have wealth in any capacity. They do not have enough, and they do not produce enough to do anything. So when you have this reality of existing in time, and this is America's an interesting one because it's only 200 years old, huge amount of exploitation. Do not get me fucking wrong. Lots of genocides. We've done a couple. But the thing that's interesting about America is we don't have 500 years of exploitation or anything that's backing it up. There's actually a lot of money in and out, very little in the government in comparison to, private interests. And so in time, where we're sitting is this odd place of capital needing to constantly be changing. How do we consider regulating that system? How do we think about regulating that system? And how is that not also creating that same problem where it's like, hey, if we have, it's the same thing as I always say, tomorrow we get rid of capitalism. We no longer have capital as a value, and we're determining every step, and we're telling people what work they have to do. How do we do that? How do we reward people? How do we know what needs to go where? Capital does some level of this decently. It works. It's broken and it's fucked up, and it does it through exploitation, but it works. How do we replace those things? How do we make a system that actually does work? Well, their argument would be that you're starting in the wrong place. And this would be my argument too. All of this is the end point. The way I was saying for Noah, that the sandwich or the truck or the book or the computer is a representation of the labor and exploitation that is in that supply chain. It is the end point of consumption. So too is capitalism, or whatever we might be thinking of, is the end point and the bullshit at the end of that huge amount of repression that's taking place underneath it. That comes back to the impulses of desire and libido, because that is ultimately what is being constrained and brutalized by the capitalist system. It's giving us images. It's giving us stories. It's giving us narratives. It's giving us goals. It's giving us goals. And when we have goals, we will make our way to them, no matter what. That's how we'll function. There's no moment of pure relationality in capitalism. It's not really how it works. That's how capital works, but the larger system requires goals. Oh no, we need to make sure that we save for our profits next year, because how we're built in the capitalist system is not freely just in a capitalist system. We're built in a nuclear family. We're built in a symbolic structure that gives us this, hey, here's this thing, here's this thing, here's this thing. These are your goals. This is how you relate. Everything's about these larger symbolic relations. So when we say I'm living well, I'm actually not talking about my imminent actual experience of life. I'm talking about my understanding of the relation of how other people tell me their stories work and how I understand it online. And that's all of this is how we get Trump and fascism, because that's ends up being the, oh, I understand my place, my pre-conscious class interest, but I'm ignoring my underlying libidinal investments, because the investments are always in a system. They're always in a thing that seems to be working. I don't mind, and it feels good even, being a cog in a good workforce. If you've ever been in a band, if you've ever played an instrument, when everyone's jamming and you're doing like really wildly good improv and everyone's just playing and it flows to your turn and you hit that note exactly right and it works and it hits, there's nothing that feels as good. But that's not just, that's artists, it's singers, it's workers in a factory line. It feels good to be a cog in a machine because we're working, we're able to function, we're able to be part of that. We love it. It feels so fucking great because work can feel good, sure. But how? The libidinal investment, the impulses of desire that are put in line so that feels good are there because of this larger symbolic structure, which is then in place because of the larger capitalist Urstadt symbolic structure that's there. These things are crushing desire. They crush desire's emergent behaviors. It's non-emergent. Capitalism takes advantage of the emergent side of things, but uses it in service of the already static, large-scale dead symbols that aren't emergent, that have no life, that don't allow life. And this is the difference. So when we start talking about what the next thing could be, the large scale laws, yes, we can create something. And I think there's really interesting ways of doing laws. And I think there's really fun ways of doing that, but it doesn't matter because at the base of it, all of desire is being crushed into us understanding our goals and being conditioned by the very system that we're trying to figure out how to subvert. So, long way around, capitalism is going to create images and symbols that are in service at large of everything that's happening and what people seem to like and what everyone's invested in. And because of the relationality and structures all the way down to my family, I'm being taught the same relations and finding myself inside of that same system. But the emergent parts of desire don't stop. Artists, scientists, philosophers, thinkers, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. Every single person, there's always a place you can find a way to make art or do something that's a little off. Those things break the system, but capitalism likes that. This isn't the despotic that requires it to be in line with what the king sees. Capitalism allows these little breaks because those small breaks, if they're going to grow, that's fine. The relations of capitalism work imminently. It is an immanent system. It isn't a top-down system. That's the despotic. That ain't capital. Capital ain't top-down. It's immanent. It is suffused into every single thing desire's doing. And so because of that, all the actions and all the tiny little bits are in service of capital. It's conditioning, it's building, and that large gregarious thing that we then fall back on and we collapse and we break the emergent parts of the entire thing, that's what fucks us. If we can break that, if we can switch it, like it is this easy to say, not this easy to do, but if we were to go, hey, actually, what if we were to make representation and make it submissive to desire? Right now, desire in service of it? What if we made it in service of desire? Well, that's it. That literally changes everything. That literally functionally changes everything that happens in the entire world. That little tiny change. And that's it. But how is a big fucking question, because we exist in time, in space, and we don't really exist at all. So how do we do that? Sorry for the ramble. Still there, Josh?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really enjoy most about Deleuze is that it's not just about making things better or understanding what it means to make things better, even in terms of the concept of exploitation, because exploitation must be understood, I think, in Deleuzian terms in ways that are much richer than just defining it in a formulaic way, in terms, in any formulaic way, in terms, in financial terms. It's because, well, I don't know that this would come under the banner of exploitation, but for everyone who partakes of or participates in a capitalist system, and it doesn't matter what their economic standing is, that they are. Maybe I shouldn't use the word exploited, but in some sense or another, they're going to be deprived, and they don't know that they're deprived precisely because they don't have that. They can't stand outside of. They don't have the ability to stand outside of that overall structure that determines how they understand what their desires are, right? And so, to me, that's a very that's such a tremendously powerful idea that they, that Deleuze and Guattari are operating.
100%. It's the thing that, it's the only time I've actually felt after reading. This is the thing that when it finally hit me, I've always been attracted to the idea, but it was a few years ago when finally, I don't remember what reading it was, where it struck me that this is what they're aiming at, that the emergence of how the impulses could be free to just do as they do, that idea, the idea of emergence, that shifted for me so fundamentally, the idea that, oh wait, we actually can figure out how to get past this, because capitalism is taking advantage of emergence. It will happily take in whatever you've got. It's at the company that will, hey, you can pitch any idea you want. We'd love it. And then they do. And then they give you a bonus. The joke about the guy who did the fiery Cheetos getting $50. The guy who invented fiery Cheetos getting no money because he's just some little worker. They'll happily do that because you break their system, but then they'll take advantage because the system is to them a thing. And that representation is what we do it all for. The ability to flip that and understand what that means, the ability for libidinal economy to actually take hold and not be enslaved to representational economy systems. That's the stuff that I think is so fucking interesting. And again, this is why writers, I've mentioned Jean-Claude Martin, Lapoujade, Serre, Latour. There are so many I could go over, but the idea of that is so profound to me because it's oh, that's it. The moment we get rid of the need for us to attach emergent desire, emergent libido, emergent impulses to specific, triangulated elements that we already are conditioned by. If you can do that, then suddenly there's a freedom. There's a freedom. And I think this is a Klosowski in Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle. And this is why they stem from Nietzsche. The power to forget. The power to forget is the thing. Because if you forget who you are, if you forget your ego, if you forget the world, and you're just doing stuff, not to hurt people, not any of that. That's the wrong discussion. There's no to. If you're just doing the impulses and emergence sort of exists, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. And that's kind of the point. And it just feels incredibly powerful. I've always loved it. Man, I love this shit. The last line I want to go over for a moment, though, because it's sort of finishing the point. The factories are prisons. They do not resemble prisons. They are prisons. Again, there is no metaphor here. They do not like metaphorical thinking. They don't like analogical thinking. That's symbolic. That's representational. These things seem like each other. You're staying in representation. You're not dealing with the emergent, direct connecting materiality of the world. Right? Foucault, and this is when it was like Wild Foucault appears, that's kind of the thing. Foucault, when he talks about disciplinary societies, disciplinary analysis of things, the two of them ended up writing about this, but it's not that the model of the carceral prison spreads metaphorically. It's not that they're, schools are, they're built by people who do prisons and they kind of look like them. They kind of seem the same. No, it's actually the same apparatus. It's a different form, but it's the same apparatus. One of the things Deleuze does in Foucault, which has quickly become one of my favorite Deleuze books, don't read the English. The thing Deleuze is pulling out of Foucault is this, Foucault uses extremely metaphorical language. Deleuze sees it very differently. That what Foucault has found is not that they're kind of similar and we get vibes between them, but that they are at a functional level the same apparatus. That it's not a metaphor or some poetic flight of fancy. That the institutional form it takes, we can find ways to justify it as different. The form, the representation, but the apparatus, that shit, that's the big deal here. That's the thing that's driving it. Because as we have these sort of things, this factory, prison, school, internet identity, the literal operational mode is built into all of these things. The forms may be different. I can leave a factory when I want. You can. You can also die of hunger if you leave halfway through a shift and get fired. So you're kind of free. This is not a metaphor. The actual operant is still there. Fundamentally still there. And this is really, really good, by the way. Because again, as I talk about it, I posted a link in chat and in YouTube. If you get a chance to read it, it's worth taking a moment just to read a bit. Today, at least 650 prisons in 46 states use incarcerated labor for agricultural production, with over 30,000 incarcerated people working on farms or in food-related positions. That's a huge number of people. It's a huge number of people. And this article is earlier this year. They're literally making moves to make this institutionalized across everything. So when they say like 46 states, 30,000, you have to remember that's insane numbers. It's enough to staff an entire field. It's enough to staff a farm. It's enough to staff a Tyson manufacturing plant, for example. Cargill Foods uses them. Just to read, these products can include fruits, vegetables, meats, dairies, and even specialty items. In fact, smaller businesses rely on prison labor, often for artisanal or niche products like goat cheese. Ultimately, these foods produced with prison labor end up on supermarket shelves without any labeling or consumer awareness. This is where we're heading. And this is the same thing. This is continuing it. It works the same. The form is different, but it works the same. And it sucks. Very depressing. You can pick which autocrat rules over your salary. It's not far from, and again, even when you run your own business and you do your own thing, the razor's edge you live on until you are an actual capitalist, because you will not build a business where you're working every day till you die. A plumber, by the way, doesn't really get to retire. They die doing it. A lot of people don't understand how these things work. You can make very good money, but if it's your labor doing it, you're doing that till the day you die. Until you can exploit other people, then you get to retire, and you get to retire on 60, 65, and that's great. You are a plumber who starts a plumbing company, and you have 5 people working underneath you that you take part of all their money. Yeah, it's great. That's what having your own business looks like. And even then, you're at the whims of investors, you're at the whims of other people, you're at the whims of markets. It's a completely different beast. Hasn't the U.S. always used prisoners for labor? Well, I mean, we didn't when we had slavery, but after slavery, yes, we began using prisoners for labor. The difference, I think, is that what was a practice in the South, and there were farm prisons, like during Jim Crow and everything, it's bolstered out to the point where, like, there are factory prisons where they're the same building. Like, I don't think people realize how fucked up we are at this point. It's wild. It's wild. In Texas, incarcerated men pick cotton at an economic loss to the state. Forced field work is intentionally used to conjure memories of slavery in incarcerated people that help officers assert control. Lawsuits have shown this. One man, Jorge Renaud, who spent 27 years incarcerated in Texas, recalled, "That's how it goes in prison. There are house hands and field hands. Not working is not an option. The former, house hands, is a prize for obedience and minding your business. The second, farm hands, is punishment for misbehaving or having a bad attitude. Either way, your body and your labor belong to the state." And when we talk about operating at a loss, all of these systems do this. The state basically is giving free labor that costs almost nothing to companies, and the state and the projects and the prisons are losing money on it. Let's do a quick thing, and then we'll be getting out of here. Because I want to, let's see, I've got this. And then I'll just go. Well, that's terrible. That's terrible positioning, Brooks. All right, we'll just zoom in. And that's still terrible positioning. What the fuck? We're going to read a part of this article because I feel like it. And that's how this works. This is from the Marshall Project, Battle Over an Old Institution. More than half U.S. states observed a public holiday for Juneteenth, a celebration dedicated to the end of legal slavery. One of those states is Alabama, and according to a recent lawsuit, the state did so while perpetrating a kind of modern-day slavery, because it compels incarcerated people to work under the threat of punishment. It's unclear of how it'll fare in court, blah, 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 blah. 1 second. Cotton harvesting in Texas prison farms is done with the aid of more farm machinery nowadays, with less need for compelling manual labor, but has not been abandoned. Writing from a Texas prison this month, Zandangoli describes how the hoe squad slaves under the sun for no pay, while the bosses wearing cowboy hats sit on their horses in the shade drinking cold beverages. Thank you, Brett. Welcome to the collective. Despite paying no wages, the cotton harvest at Texas prison is an economic loser. Thank you, Shai Halid, for gifting a membership, too. Oh, you gifted Brett the membership. Thank you, Shai Halid, for it. The point is to remind people that the state owns you. They want to make it parallel to slavery. They're willing to do it at their own cost. Cotton cultivation, along with most prison agriculture, is also in the red in Louisiana. In 2019, state audit documents show it's unsafe, too. According to a suit filed this week, better known as Angola, the state penitentiary, Angola. A nod to the plantation that preceded the prison. I hate this country sometimes. The suit alleges that the prison does not take the appropriate precautions to ensure safety. Shocking, I know. I'm sure everyone's shocked. They rejected a constitutional amendment to ban slavery in 2022. Same year, Alabama passed its version, but did so after the bill's sponsor came out against it, calling the language confusing. Jesus Christ, this country. It's heartbreaking and awful. But this is at Louisiana State Penitentiary. This farm. He's not at the farm. Okay. He's there doing it. And this is from 2024. This photos. This is awful. It's depressed me now. All right. That'll be it for me. We're going to be getting out of here in a minute. Just depressing. Alex, you had a question for me. Is it philosophy related?
Yeah. Well, it's philosophy of economics specifically.
Please, let's see if I can try. I do not promise anything.
So, are you familiar at all with cybernetics and the ideas of Norbert Feiner?
I'm familiar with cybernetics. I don't know Feiner very well.
Okay, so basically, what I've heard, an argument for capitalism that I've heard from some people is basically, and this is associated with Hayek, is the idea that if you have a decentralization of capital and you don't have central planning of market prices, that'll actually lead to less exploitation in the long run, because what you happen is that capital will go to market equilibrium, tend toward market equilibrium, because basically you'll have a negative feedback loop when there's market failures, and then consumers will vote with their dollar to shift capital away from products that lead to market failures to markets which satisfy their desire. And so basically capital has a tendency toward market equilibrium, which will decrease exploitation.
I mean, I think I would argue that the last 14, 15 years shows that just isn't true functionally. As a consumer, the idea of low interest loans that ballooned later literally destroyed the world's economy in 2008. And we're literally doing the exact same thing again with car loans right now. Like it's identical. People are dumb. I shouldn't say people are dumb. Capitalism produces in us and deals with us in a way that's really fucked up, where we don't vote meaningfully. We don't make choices meaningfully. One of the challenges we run into is that people don't really have that grasp of, one, what all goes into any single product. As I was just saying, like the representation of that supply line is my computer, but that's just, there's literally no way for me to tell from my computer where it was made, how it was made, how good it was, or any of those things. How many economies has my computer been responsible for? How many people dying have gone, like how many souls of humans are in, like I don't have any idea, nor will I ever. And no one's going to be able to investigate that. It's done. So that's one challenge there is people don't really vote with their wallets. It's a phrase that like presumes an intelligence amongst choosing and consumption that I don't think exists. But the fact that we literally have the same exact crunch coming in right now that we had 15 years ago, that we had 10 years before that, like we repeat this thing over and over, and we do really dumb shit where we're deregulating and removing even the regulations that were put in place to stop 2008. Like we repeat that shit because what capitalism does is at its base constantly pushes for that edge. Now, this is me. Let me speak from a almost Randian fucking pro-capitalist point. The thing that's fascinating about capitalism is it will destroy everything. It works best when there is a crisis, because when everything's falling apart, that's when the rules of the game can change, and it gives us opportunity to have innovation and new builds and new changes. For example, the housing market crashing created the current housing bubble, which is fascinating. But because it was so cheap, all the people who still had money in that period were like, oh shit, houses are cheap, so I'm actually going to buy them. And it developed to what we have today, which is like a 20% of Americans are renting versus 20 years ago, where it was not even close to that. So that shift, capital is like, damn, I love this. And it runs at it. So there's no reason to presume that capital wouldn't just continue to enjoy and exploit and make things worse and worse and worse. Because again, the last 20 years just show that people don't, that it fundamentally just doesn't work, I think. Unless I misunderstood what you were saying, but...
That makes sense. And I would just say that I think Mises and Hayek would argue that, and you can say this is wrong, and that's a fair interpretation of the data, but I think they would argue from the reading I've done of their works on human action that the reason for the irrationality of the current market is the central banking system, which they would argue this lowers interest rates to such a degree that it allows irrational investment, and that if we had a decentralization of currency production, we wouldn't have irrational investments because we wouldn't have artificially low interest rates. But that's a fair criticism.
I would argue crypto actually would really say, unless they would say something like, well, crypto's still affected by the central bank. At that point, it's like, so then there's no, like, it's a very no true Scotsman logical ending point where it's like, oh, so nothing I can ever bring up because it's kind of a trump card. But I'd say like crypto shows the absolute silliness and stupidity when it comes to true decentralized, because there's no central bank in crypto. But in the last year, we have seen Bitcoin travel to $126,000 a token, dropping to 86,000. I think I saw this morning. Which is trillions of dollars have disappeared from the marketplace, real world, through these odd systems and out. And people put their money in really dumb shit because it's a gambling mechanism when it's decentralized. It's, oh, this is going to go up because of X, Y, and Z. That entrepreneurs, and again, Mises, God, how long has it been? I was a Randian in high school, so I went through a phase, and Mises it does actually predate me. I know I'm an old fuck, but he does actually predate me a little bit. But it's been a while. But it's the idea that, like, the way he talks about it, that in entrepreneurs act rationally. The AI infrastructure should show that there is no way for AI to ever make money. No one has ever been able to explain to me. Someone is coming through really loud. I think that got fixed. The AI infrastructure that people are investing or trying to invest over $1 trillion into, there's hundreds of billions that have been put into it, doesn't have the ability to make money. Like, there's no ability to make profit from it. It functionally doesn't exist because of the way that it works and what it does and things like that. So I can go through why. I have an entire video explaining why that you can go find. But the idea of these rational investors putting money into that, I'm very hesitant to say that there's anything that's been shown that humans have rationality. And I would go with what is literally from the reading today, just to sort of cap that off and try to make that relate back. Capitalism's rationality is madness. The madness of, the egg-headed fuck who's putting hundreds of billions of dollars into OpenAI, who's funding all of these things, Andreessen, the way that they're putting money into all these things, it's he's rational, but it is madness. He doesn't have anything to substantiate. There's no reason to substantiate anything he's doing except for like a wish and a prayer, and fucking, it's like pulls an eyelash out and he's like, oh, here's $100 billion. But that insanity is the rationality of capital. That's how it has functioned. And sometimes it works. People putting money into all kinds of dumb shit over the years. The internet is a good example of this, actually, continuously. But even before that, the way that manufacturing worked, or the idea of toys, some jackass, George Lucas mostly, went, I actually want the toy license and we're going to do production of toys. And he made a fortune. People didn't make toys the way he understood toys. That thing that he did that broke and shifted gives huge economic opportunities that grows things. This is the positive. This is the machine working. But we see that thing. We don't see the millions of failed ideas or dead bodies of capital alongside him. And so you end up in this place where it's like the rational choice. Rational is determined by the system that they're within. And we've seen over and over that ain't rational, not in a unified singular logic way, but in a only within the relations of the subsystem itself way. And within capitalism, that subsystem is as irrational as it needs to be to claim rationality, which sounds weird, but I hope it made a little bit of sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just the final thing I'll say about this, because it sounds like we need to close the reading, is just that I think the only way to test these economic theories is if we had more controlled economic data. But I think a lot of the current way we source economic data is flawed because they're multivariable. But that's all I'll say.
I will actually 100% agree, because here's the challenge of this. There's a phenomenal book on economic causality and how it's almost impossible. It's a really I will find it. I'll find it and I'll post it somewhere and I will ping you. Because the really interesting thing is, whenever we measure, the nature of measurement is that we're basically creating a vacuum. In 2 minutes, I'll be up. We're basically creating a vacuum of information around it. We're saying this is the thing that matters and we're not measuring anything else. But in an economic system, because everything is, especially capitalism, when everything is internally relational, like my computer is, there's so many fucking psychotic reasons it would be worth what it's worth at any given point that it's actually impossible to come up with a causative chain around the entire thing, because as you cut things off, you go, oh, actually that should go back in there. That should go back in there. That should go back in. Oh, actually this. And suddenly you have so much information, you can't actually denote causality from any of those things, because that's more how things really actually work. And so when you talk about like, the value of any given thing, or how it sort of comes up, or how we can sort of trace it back, that challenge becomes, oh, we value this economically because of these variables we've chosen. Why did we choose those? Because that's the variables we like, or that's the variables that the system works within. So the system becomes self-regulatingly rational, but it's only rational within that very closed sort of loop of itself. And as soon as you add more to it, it becomes like everything else. It's the Nietzschean question. We've been able to push people for years, but now can you explain to me exactly how pushing works? And we can't. No one can. No one knows how pushing works until you start getting to a point where you're like, well, we don't know, because there's no boundaries of that. It doesn't work the same way. The same with economics. And so these are these large scale systems which we're building down. It puts us into this nightmare of like justification and measurement. I'm going to find that book. I'll send it. I've got to bounce. I've got to run. The kids are waiting for me. I will talk to y'all later. Thank you all for joining. As always, join the Discord, discord.gg/DGQC. Join us live. Of course, if you go on to support what I'm doing, it would adore you. I would adore you to head to patreon.com/DGQC. Send a few bucks my way. With that, I will say, thank you all.